Have you ever watched someone completely unqualified take over everything you built and run it straight into the ground? I'm talking about years of sacrifice, late nights, missed family dinners, all of it handed over to someone whose biggest accomplishment was being born into the right family. Well, let me tell you about the day I walked away from 8 years of blood and sweat, took $40 million in clients with me, and watched my former company collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. This is the story of corporate warfare, strategic revenge, and how I became the most expensive mistake my old boss ever made. The moment I knew everything was about to change started on a Tuesday morning in September. I was sitting in my corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains, reviewing quarterly projections that I had personally engineered to perfection. The spreadsheet on my screen represented 8 years of my life, 8 years of building a struggling software consultancy into a powerhouse that Fortune 500 companies actually respected. I had turned chaos into strategy, transformed panic into profit, and created a client portfolio that would make any competitor weep with envy. My entire existence had become a carefully calculated series of wins, each one stacked on top of the other like a perfectly balanced tower. I don't drink excessively, I don't create drama, and I absolutely refuse to accept failure as an option. My version of a vice is a triple espresso and the electric silence that fills a boardroom after I've just presented a solution that saves a client $10 million. But that Tuesday morning, something felt different. The air in the office had changed, like atmospheric pressure drops right before a massive storm rolls in. I had spent nearly a decade as the structural foundation of this company, the person who actually made things work while others took credit for the results. I wasn't the face you'd see on our marketing materials or the name that appeared in industry publications. That honor belonged to Old Man Miller, the founder who had started this consultancy back when technology meant something completely different. But I was the one doing the real work, the person who flew coach to unglamorous cities on random Tuesday nights to convince skeptical executives that digital transformation wouldn't destroy their entire operation. When Miller finally decided to retire after 40 years of building his dream, I genuinely thought I understood what came next. The succession plan seemed obvious to everyone who actually paid attention. Miller called me into his office on my 8th anniversary with the company. He looked at me with those weathered eyes that had seen countless business cycles and industry transformations. His handshake was firm, calloused from decades of hard work. He told me I was the engine that made everything run, the critical component without which the entire machine would grind to a halt. Those words should have been followed by a promotion, an equity stake, maybe even a partnership offer. Instead, what came next changed the trajectory of my entire career. He told me that while I was the engine, his son Braden needed a playground. Just like that, with one casual statement, the keys to a $40 million kingdom were handed to a 30-year-old whose most significant professional accomplishment was being born to the right father. Braden walked into the office on his first official day as CEO wearing a fleece vest that probably cost more than my first car payment. He smelled like aggressive sandalwood cologne mixed with unearned confidence, the olfactory equivalent of privilege. He didn't walk like someone who understood the weight of responsibility. Instead, he moved through the office like a toddler who just discovered he owned the entire sandbox and could kick over anyone else's sandcastles whenever he felt like it. The transition period wasn't a thoughtful handover of institutional knowledge. It was watching a hostile takeover executed by someone who thought strategy meant choosing the right font for presentations. Braden's first week in charge, he completely reorganized the entire office seating arrangement based on what he called organizational vibes. He physically moved the engineering team right next to the sales team because he wanted cross-pollination of ideas, which is corporate speak for creating an environment where half your workforce has constant anxiety attacks. I sat in my corner office, watching this infection spread through the company culture like a virus. Braden didn't care about the things that actually mattered in our industry. He wasn't interested in deliverables or client satisfaction scores. Instead, he obsessed over optics and appearance, spending hours debating font sizes while completely ignoring the actual data those presentations contained. He brought in an espresso machine so complicated it required a dedicated smartphone app just to brew coffee. Then came his most baffling hire, a chief vibe officer named Kyle who wore beanies indoors and communicated exclusively through LinkedIn motivational quotes that meant absolutely nothing. My first one-on-one meeting with Braden as CEO should have been a warning I couldn't ignore. He leaned back in his chair like someone posing for a magazine cover that would never exist. He told me I was incredible, truly a legacy asset, but then came the qualifier that made my blood run cold. We needed to pivot, he explained. We needed to be more agile, more disruptive to our market. I repeated the word disruptive back to him, my voice completely flat. I reminded him that we managed enterprise software implementation for Fortune 500 logistics companies. These clients didn't want disruption in their operations. They wanted their trucks to show up on time and their supply chains to function so smoothly that nobody ever had to think about them. If we disrupted them the way he was suggesting, entire sectors of the economy would grind to a halt. He blinked at me with that blank expression of someone who had never personally experienced real consequences for bad decisions. After a long pause, he agreed that maybe disruption wasn't quite the right word, but then he told me I was very operational in my thinking, but what he really needed was for me to be more visionary. I could see exactly what was happening. He didn't want a strategist who understood market dynamics and client psychology. He wanted a cheerleader who would enthusiastically applaud while he drove the entire company off a cliff. The quarterly review was approaching, and for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't leading the preparation. I was being consulted, which is corporate speak for being systematically edged out while maintaining a thin veneer of inclusion. I went home that evening and poured myself a glass of wine, something that cost $40 a bottle because I had earned it. My husband looked at me with concern and told me I looked like I was planning a murder. I took a long sip and told him I wasn't planning murder. What I was planning was much more precise. I was planning a controlled demolition. The disrespect started as a low hum, like a fluorescent light about to fail. The moment Braden called me a legacy asset, treating me like old furniture he could store in a basement, that was the moment his fate was sealed. He thought I was outdated equipment that could be replaced with a newer model that cost less and complained less. What he failed to understand was that I wasn't furniture at all. I was the foundation of the entire structure, and foundations remember exactly where every weakness is buried. The rot spread through the organization like a mudslide, fast and destructive. Braden didn't just ignore the operational playbook that had guided our success. He actively burned it, then tried to navigate by reading smoke signals. He started hiring from what he called his network, and for Braden, his network was a collection of fraternity brothers and Instagram acquaintances who thought scaling a business meant making the logo bigger. That's when Tiffany entered the picture. Tiffany was 24 years old with a degree in media studies from what I'm fairly certain was an online program of questionable accreditation. Her official title was Strategic Liaison, a job description so vague it could mean anything or nothing. I walked into our Monday morning pipeline meeting, a ritual I had established to maintain honest accountability around revenue, and discovered my seat had been taken. Tiffany was sitting in my chair, typing on an iPad covered in a neon pink case. When I approached, she told me that Braden had decided we were doing a standing retro, so I should grab a spot on the floor if I wanted to participate. I stood there like a statue carved from granite and pure concentrated fury. Braden breezed in 5 minutes late holding a green juice that looked like pond scum. He announced that our energy was low, then made a statement that nearly caused my eye to twitch. He acknowledged our numbers were down but claimed that numbers were essentially feelings wearing hats, as if objective reality was subject to positive thinking. I cut through his nonsense, reminding him that our third quarter numbers were down 20% specifically because we had missed the renewal deadline for the Omnicorp account, a situation I had explicitly warned him about 3 weeks earlier. Braden dismissed my concern with a wave, claiming Omnicorp represented old energy. According to his logic, we should be chasing unicorns now instead of maintaining valuable relationships. Then he turned to Tiffany and asked her to present the TikTok strategy. I sat in growing horror as Tiffany presented a slide deck that was 90% emojis, proposing that we market our enterprise-grade supply chain software by creating viral dance challenges on social media. The engineers studied their shoes. The sales VP stared at the ceiling. I looked at Braden and saw the future with perfect clarity. He wasn't just stupid or inexperienced. He was dangerously arrogant. Braden began systematically cutting what he called non-essential departments. First, he eliminated the entire quality assurance team, asking why we needed people to test software when the code should just work. Then he cut the client success team, reasoning that if clients liked our product, they would stay without ongoing support. He had completely missed that our 98% renewal rate existed specifically because of that team. I tried voicing concerns privately, booking time on his calendar. When I told him he was cutting the legs off the table, he sighed theatrically and spun a fidget spinner on his desk. An actual fidget spinner in 2024. He told me I was bringing negative energy, that he needed radiators rather than drains. Then he told me I sounded very boomer in my thinking. I reminded him I was 42 years old, that I was sounding like a strategist who wanted the company to survive. He smiled condescendingly and suggested I take a half day, go get a facial, that I looked tired. That was the precise moment something fundamental shifted inside me. I didn't scream or engage in any dramatic display. Instead, I went cold, the kind of deep Arctic cold that comes when fury transforms into calculated purpose. I walked back to my office, closed the door, and opened a new folder on my personal encrypted drive. I named it the Titanic because I knew exactly where the ship was headed. I started systematically documenting everything. Every insane email, every missed deadline, every client complaint Tiffany ignored. I made backup copies of every presentation I had created, every strategic document I had written, every piece of evidence that demonstrated my value. I wasn't functioning as an employee anymore. I was a black box recorder in a plane that was definitely going to crash, methodically preserving every detail that would explain exactly what went wrong. The veterans started avoiding eye contact with me in the hallways. They could sense that I was on a collision course with Braden and that my time was limited. Braden had started copying Tiffany on all my client emails, even the sensitive ones. 2 days later, I witnessed Tiffany responding to the chief information officer of a major banking client. She used the wrong acronym for their compliance standard and signed off with cheers, Tiff Zoxo, like she was texting a friend about brunch. The CIO didn't respond. I took a screenshot, saved it to my Titanic folder, and took a sip of my coffee. The taste was getting bitter, but I was starting to enjoy it. The mandatory town hall meeting arrived. We shuffled into the main conference room, air thick with stale bagels and impending doom. Braden stood at the front wearing a headset microphone like he was delivering a TED Talk. Behind him, a giant screen displayed a word cloud where vibe appeared as the largest term. He announced that we were evolving, shedding the skin of our past. He said that honestly, the past had been heavy, slow, and expensive. As he said this, he looked directly at me, and the entire room followed his gaze. I didn't flinch. I sat with my spine perfectly straight, a notebook open in front of me, though I wasn't taking notes. I was drawing a geometric pattern representing the collapse of everything he thought he was building. Braden clicked to his next slide, revealing the account renewal plan for Project Orion, our largest and most technically demanding client. Defense contractors who didn't care about vibes, who conducted rigorous audits and demanded perfection. Braden announced with visible excitement that Tiffany would be leading the Orion pitch. The room went completely silent. Everyone who understood our business knew what Orion represented. This client ate junior analysts for breakfast. Tiffany stood up beaming, announcing she had made a mood board for them. The pitch was scheduled for that afternoon via Zoom. I wasn't officially invited, but I still had the login credentials from when I had set up this recurring meeting 5 years ago. I sat in my office with headphones on, camera disabled, microphone muted, lurking invisibly. The client was Colonel Sterling, a 60-year-old former military officer with zero tolerance for nonsense. Tiffany began talking about brand alignment and holistic software journeys. She kept addressing him as Mr. Sterling despite his corrections that his title was Colonel. 10 minutes in, Colonel Sterling cut her off. He stated bluntly that he didn't care about journeys, that what he wanted to know was why the latency on their server clusters had increased by 0.4%, and where exactly was Renee. He made it clear he didn't sign multi-million-dollar contracts with children. There was painful silence. Tiffany froze completely. Braden panicked, his voice cracking as he explained I was transitioning to a strategic oversight role. Colonel Sterling wanted me on the line immediately, or he would pull the entire contract. My phone started ringing. I let it ring 3 times, making Braden wait. When I answered, my voice was deliberately casual. I told him I was busy, reminding him I was being phased out. He hissed into the phone, begging me to get on the call. I logged in and turned on my camera. Colonel Sterling's face visibly relaxed when he saw me. I dropped my voice into professional command mode, apologized for the confusion, and immediately addressed his technical concern. I explained the latency issue was a cache-clearing error on the secondary node, that we had a patch ready to deploy that night. Regarding the contract renewal, I told him I had the revised service level agreement prepared with his specific guarantees. Colonel Sterling grunted his approval, told me to send the documentation, and warned me to stop wasting his time with interns. I had just saved a $2 million contract in 45 seconds. I expected at minimum a thank you. Instead, Braden appeared in my office doorway. He didn't come inside, just leaned against the frame with arms crossed. He told me I had really undermined Tiffany's credibility, that I had made the team look weak. I stared at him, genuinely breathless at the sheer audacity. I reminded him I had saved the contract. His response revealed everything. He told me I had just shown off, that business wasn't about being right, it was about being a team player. If I couldn't support the new direction, maybe I shouldn't be steering the ship anymore. He walked away without waiting for a response. The humiliation wasn't that he had tried to replace me. The humiliation was that he was too fundamentally stupid to even understand that he couldn't. I closed my office door and locked it. I pulled up my LinkedIn profile but didn't change my status to openly seeking opportunities because that signals desperation. Instead, I opened my personal email and composed a message to someone I had considered an enemy for the past decade. Marcus was the vice president of strategy at Apex Solutions, our biggest and most aggressive competitor. We had fought over clients for years. Despite our competitive relationship, Marcus respected me because I was the only person who had ever consistently beaten him. My email was brief and coded. The subject line said coffee and the body said the weather is changing, might be time for a new coat. I hit send, then pulled up our company's employment handbook and turned directly to page 45, the section covering non-compete clauses. I read that legal language carefully, then read it again with the attention to detail that had made me successful. The contract was a template downloaded from the internet 10 years ago. Old man Miller was cheap when it came to lawyers. He believed in handshakes. Clause 14b was standard non-compete language stating employees couldn't solicit existing clients for 12 months post-termination. Scary if you don't know how to read. But then Clause 14c, the rainmaker exception. Miller had added this years ago to attract high-level sales talent. Unless said employee was the sole originator of the client relationship and had maintained primary contact for the duration of the contract, in which case the client was exempt from solicitation restrictions. Sole originator. Primary contact. I looked at my client list. There were 22 major accounts. I had brought in 18 of them personally. I was the emergency contact for all of them. Braden, in his infinite wisdom, never bothered to update the contracts or formally assign himself to the accounts. He was too busy picking out beanbag chairs for the break room. I was in the clear, but I needed to be bulletproof. I started cleaning my files, forwarding every instance of me landing a deal to my personal server. Every thanks, every let's do lunch, every we're signing because of you. I built a digital dossier that proved I was the business. A smile spread across my face, cold and sharp as a razor blade. The devil might hide in the details, but salvation lived in the fine print. I met Marcus for lunch at a steakhouse 3 towns over, a dark wood-paneled place where the waiters ignored you unless you were wearing a suit worth more than a car. Marcus was already there swirling heavy red wine. He grinned when he saw me, looking like a wolf who just found out the sheep pen was left unlocked. He asked if the rumors were true, if the Prince of Darkness was actually as dumb as they said. I told him Braden wasn't the Prince of Darkness. He was the prince of Pinterest, and yes, it was worse. I didn't give him a hard sell. I just laid out the facts. I managed 40 million in recurring annual revenue. The clients trusted me. They hated Braden. He was trying to push me out. Marcus leaned in and asked about the non-compete. I told him about Clause 14C. Marcus laughed, a dry barking sound. He said Miller's old Rainmaker clause, asked if Braden even knew it existed. I told him Braden didn't know. He thought a contract was just something you signed to get the company iPad. Marcus stopped laughing and looked at me with dead serious eyes. If I came to Apex, they didn't just want me, they wanted the portfolio. Could I deliver? I told him I didn't have to deliver them. They were going to come running. I just needed a landing pad big enough to catch them. Marcus offered to double my base salary, VP title, full autonomy, and a signing bonus that would pay off my mortgage. I told him I wanted one more thing. He told me to name it. I wanted to run the acquisition strategy targeting my old firm. I wanted to be the one who twisted the knife. Marcus raised his glass. We clinked. The deal was done. Going back to the office the next day felt surreal. I was walking through a graveyard, but the ghosts were still typing on keyboards. Braden passed me in the hallway wearing noise-canceling headphones, singing along to something terrible. He shouted that there was a big budget meeting tomorrow, told me to bring my A-game because we needed to trim some fat. I told him I'd be there, that I was bringing the butcher knife. He gave me a thumbs up, completely oblivious. I went back to my desk and printed my resignation letter. I didn't date it. I just slipped it into my leather folio right next to the printout of Clause 14C. I was calm, the kind of calm you feel before a storm breaks. The conference room was freezing. Braden kept the AC on blast because he read somewhere that cold temperatures activate the hustler mindset. We were all shivering. Braden stood at the whiteboard wielding a red marker like a weapon. He had drawn a pie chart that made no mathematical sense. He announced that our burn rate was too high, that we were spending too much on legacy infrastructure. He looked at me. Legacy infrastructure was code for people who know what they're doing. He said he'd been looking at the salary bands, and frankly, they were lopsided. Some people were earning executive money for doing mid-level execution. I put my pen down. I told him if he was referring to my compensation, it was tied to the revenue I generated, that I brought in 10 times what he paid me. He turned, capping the marker with a loud click. He asked if I really did, or if the brand brought it in. He told me that was my problem, that I thought I was the star, but the company was the star, the vibe was the star. Tiffany nodded vigorously, saying it was about the ecosystem. Braden agreed enthusiastically, then told me that right now, my ecosystem was expensive. He could hire 3 Tiffany's for the price of 1 me. The room went dead silent. The CFO looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and die. He knew the numbers. He knew that 3 Tiffany's equaled 0 revenue and 3 lawsuits. I asked if that was a proposal, my voice dangerously soft. Braden sighed theatrically. He said he wasn't saying I was fired, just that we needed to restructure my package. Base salary down 40%, commission capped. If I didn't like it, well, maybe I'd outgrown them. Maybe I was just too expensive for the modern world. There it was, the trigger. I looked at him, at his stupid vest, at Tiffany's smug, empty face, and I felt a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't realized I was carrying for 6 months. I stood up slowly. I asked if he thought I was expensive, if he thought I was overvalued. Braden smirked and told me honestly, I should be grateful they were keeping me around. I reached into my folio and pulled out the single sheet of paper I had printed the day before. I slid it across the mahogany table. It stopped perfectly in front of him. He asked what it was without looking at it. I told him it was my resignation, effective immediately. Braden laughed, called me a drama queen, said I couldn't just walk out, that I had a notice period and a non-compete. I told him to read the contract, the one his father wrote. He told me I didn't need to read it, that I owned it. I told him he was about to learn a very expensive lesson in literacy. I took my badge off my lanyard and placed it on the table. It made a solid clack sound that echoed in the silence. Tiffany asked where I was going, her voice squeaky. I told her I was going to find a buyer who could afford me, wished them good luck with the vibes, told them they were going to need them. I turned and walked to the door. Braden yelled that if I walked out that door, I shouldn't think I could come crawling back when I realized nobody hires 40-year-old relics. I stopped but didn't turn around. I just smiled and said goodbye. I walked past the open-plan desks, past the espresso machine, past the receptionist, pushed through the glass front doors, and stepped into the crisp Colorado air. The sun was shining. The mountains looked sharper than they had in years. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus. He answered on the first ring, asked if I'd done it. I told him I was out to initiate the offer. He told me it was already in my inbox, welcomed me to the winning team. I hung up, took a deep breath of air that didn't smell like sandalwood and failure, walked to my car, got in, and for the first time in 8 years, I turned the radio up loud. The next morning, I didn't wake up with a dread knot in my stomach. I woke up with a mission. I put on my best suit and drove to Apex Solutions. Their building was directly across the street from my old office. I could literally see Braden's floor from the conference room window. Marcus met me in the lobby with a firm handshake and a key card. He told me my office was ready, that the legal team had already reviewed my non-compete. I was right, the Rainmaker clause was ironclad. I was free to hunt. I told him let's not call it hunting, let's call it a rescue mission. I sat down at my new desk with 2 monitors, a phone that worked, and a team of 3 junior associates who looked at me like I was a general, not a nuisance. Marcus asked what the play was. I told him the play was honesty. I was going to call my clients, tell them I left, tell them where I was, and then let Braden do the rest of the work for me. Marcus asked how. I checked my watch and told him that right about now, clients were starting to call his office asking for me, and Braden was going to lie. I was right. Back at the old firm, chaos had erupted. Colonel Sterling from the Orion Project had called at 9 sharp demanding to speak with me. Tiffany answered, telling him I was taking a sabbatical, that I needed some me time, but not to worry because she was taking over his account. The colonel didn't buy it, said I hadn't told him about any sabbatical. Tiffany said it was very sudden, that mental health was so important. The colonel demanded to speak with the CEO. Braden got on the line and told the colonel that I was struggling with the workload, that they'd decided to let me go for the good of the project. He said I wasn't agile enough for their needs. The colonel's voice was low, dangerous. He said I was the only person in that clown car of a company who knew how their server architecture worked. Braden assured him they had Tiffany, that she had a mood board. The colonel hung up. 30 seconds later, my phone at Apex rang. It was the colonel. I answered professionally, asked how the servers were. He told me to hell with the servers, asked where I was. I told him I'd resigned, that I was now the VP of Strategy at Apex Solutions. He paused, said Apex was expensive. I agreed. Told him we were, but we don't hire people based on their social media following and we don't have latency issues. He asked if I could take the account. I told him I could, but he had a contract with Braden until December. The colonel growled that he had a breach of contract clause for failure to provide adequate support. If I wasn't there, there was no support. He told me to send the paperwork, that he was moving the fleet. I looked at Marcus. He was grinning like a Cheshire cat. I told the colonel I'd have the transfer documents within the hour. I hung up. Marcus said that was $5 million. I told him that was just the appetizer, now let's go for the main course. I spent the rest of the day on the phone. It was surgical. I didn't badmouth Braden, I didn't have to. I just said I was no longer there, that Tiffany was handling their account now. The panic on the other end was palpable. They asked where I was, if they could follow me. By 5 p.m., I had 7 verbal commitments. That was roughly $12 million in revenue migrating across the street in real time. I stood by the window looking across at my old building. I could see Braden pacing in his office, waving his arms. He looked like a man trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. I whispered to myself, "Burn, baby, burn," and took a sip of my sparkling water. The next week was a bloodbath, a beautiful bureaucratic bloodbath. The colonel was the first to officially pull the plug. His legal team sent a termination letter citing material breach of service level agreements. Braden tried to fight it, sent Tiffany to the colonel's office with a basket of muffins and an apology card. The colonel's security team escorted her off the premises. Then the dominoes started falling faster. The logistics giant called, said they heard I was at Apex and were exercising their 60-day opt-out. The manufacturing giant didn't even call, they just stopped paying invoices and sent a new vendor request form to Apex. My new office became a war room with whiteboard walls covered in client names. We were crossing them off one by one as they came over. My team at Apex was in awe. They had never seen a client migration like this. Usually they fought for scraps. I was bringing the whole buffet. Then I got the call I was dreading. It was Old Man Miller, the founder. I respected Miller. He was a hard man, but a fair one until he went senile and gave his kingdom to the jester. He asked what I was doing, his voice sounding old and tired. He said Braden told him I was stealing the company, that I was sabotaging him. I told him firmly that I wasn't stealing anything, I was competing. Braden fired me, or he tried to. He told me I was too expensive. Miller asked what I meant. I told him Braden said I was a legacy cost, that he replaced me with a 24-year-old who thinks ROI is a type of yoga. The clients weren't leaving because I was stealing them, they were leaving because they were terrified. There was a long silence. Miller said quietly that Braden told him I quit, that I had a breakdown. I shot back that he lied like he lies about the metrics, like he lies about the projections. I tried to warn Miller, told him Braden wasn't ready. He gave him the keys anyway. Miller said Braden was his son. I told him that company was my life's work, that I built it. Braden was destroying it. I was just salvaging the parts that worked. Miller said if I took the Apex accounts, the company collapses, that I knew they were leveraged on those contracts. I told him maybe Braden should have thought about that before he tried to lowball the person who holds the relationships. Miller asked if there was any way to stop this, if he came back and fired Braden. I paused. A part of me wanted to say yes. But then I remembered the humiliation, remembered Tiffany's mood board. I told him it was too late, that the trust was gone. The clients had signed with Apex knowing I was there, knowing I was valued there. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Miller sighed, the sound of a man watching his legacy dissolve. He said I always was a killer, he just forgot I was his killer. I said goodbye and hung up. I didn't feel guilty. I felt vindicated. An hour later, Braden called, screaming. He called me names, said he was suing me, suing Apex, that he was going to bury me in litigation so deep I'd need a submarine to get out. I put him on speaker. My legal counsel Sarah, a woman who makes great white sharks look like goldfish, was sitting across from me. Braden shrieked that I was in violation of my non-compete, Clause 14b. I told him calmly to read Clause 14c. He said there was no Clause 14c, that it was made up. I told him page 8, paragraph 3, Rainmaker exception. His father wrote it. I qualified for it on 18 accounts. And guess which 18 accounts just left him? Silence. Frantic rustling of paper. Then a gasp. He accused me of planting it. I told him I didn't plant it, I read it, something he should try doing instead of meditating. He threatened to tell everyone I was a thief. I told him to go ahead, but to be careful because defamation suits are very expensive, and unlike him, I could afford it. I hung up. Sarah smiled and said he was dead in the water, that he had no case. I told her I knew, but let's let him thrash a bit, it's good exercise. 2 weeks later, the old office was in freefall. It wasn't just the clients leaving, it was the talent. The engineers, realizing the money was drying up, started jumping ship. And where did they apply? Apex. I hired the best ones. I left the ones who had sided with Braden to rot. Braden tried one last desperate move, sent an email blast to remaining clients claiming that Apex was under federal investigation for corporate espionage. It was a lie, obviously, and a stupid one. One of those clients forwarded the email to me. I walked it down the hall to Marcus and asked if it was actionable. Marcus read it and said it was beautiful, that this was libel per SE. We could send a cease and desist that would make his head spin. I told him to do it. The cease and desist letter hit Braden's desk the next morning. We demanded a public retraction and an apology or we would sue for damages. Braden folded like a cheap lawn chair. He issued the retraction. It was the final nail in the coffin of his credibility. Then came the news about Tiffany. I was getting coffee when one of my new hires walked in and asked if I knew who just applied for their junior position. I asked who. He said Tiffany from across the street. Apparently Braden fired her yesterday, blamed her for the Orion loss, said her vibes were off. Of course he did. Rats always eat each other when the ship goes down. I told him to bring her in for an interview. He asked if I was serious. I said no, but tell her we're reviewing her application, let her sweat for a week, then send her a rejection letter in Comic Sans. Petty? Yes. Satisfying? Absolutely. The collapse of my old firm was now a spectator sport. We watched their internal valuations tank. We heard rumors of missed payroll, that Braden had sold the expensive espresso machine to pay the electric bill. The board of directors finally woke up from their naps and called an emergency vote of no confidence scheduled for Friday afternoon. I sat in my office looking at the third quarter projections for Apex. My portfolio was up 200%. My bonus was going to be obscene. I had already booked a vacation to the Amalfi Coast, an actual vacation, not a work trip. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Gary, the old CFO. He told me they just voted Braden out, that Miller was coming back as interim, but it was over. They had no cash flow, filing for Chapter 11 next week. I stared at the screen. Bankruptcy. I felt a twinge of sadness, not for Braden or the company, but for the memory of what it used to be. It was a good shop once. We did good work. But then I remembered the too expensive line, remembered the feeling of being discarded. I typed back telling Gary I was sorry, asked him to send me his resume because I needed a controller. He replied instantly, sending it now. Friday evening, the sun was setting over the Rockies, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. I stood in the Apex boardroom with a glass of champagne in my hand. My team was behind me, 20 people, half of them refugees from across the street, celebrating the record-breaking quarter. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I looked across the street. The lights were off on Braden's floor, except for one office. I saw a figure moving around. It was Braden, packing a box. I watched him pick up his Hustle Harder neon sign, his Newton's cradle. I watched him throw his vest over his shoulder. He stopped and looked out the window. He looked right at our building. I don't know if he could see me through the tinted windows, but I stepped forward anyway. I raised my glass in a silent toast and whispered, "Cheers, you absolute disaster." He turned off the light. The floor went dark. The company I had built for 8 years was gone, just a shell now, a cautionary tale about what happens when you confuse confidence with competence. Marcus walked up beside me and asked if I was okay. I told him I was better than okay, I was profitable. He told me they just got the final numbers. With the acquisition of the Steel Corporation account, I had officially surpassed the total revenue of my old firm's peak year. Marcus mused, looking at the dark building across the street, that Braden was right about one thing. I asked what that was. Marcus said I was expensive. I turned to him, smiling the smile of a woman who just won the war without getting a speck of blood on her silk blouse. I told him quality is always expensive. It's the cheap knockoffs that cost you everything. I turned back to the party. The music was playing, classic rock, not some vibe playlist. The team was laughing. The champagne was cold. I took a sip. It tasted like victory. Braden was gone. Tiffany was unemployed. And I was the queen of the mountain. I pulled out my phone one last time and opened my folder titled The Titanic. I selected all files. I hit delete. I hit empty trash. All healed, I said to the empty screen. Then I went to join my team. We had work to do after all. Expensive assets have to justify their price tag. And I was just getting started. Life doesn't always hand out clean endings, but sometimes it gives you exactly what you deserve. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt undervalued or watched incompetence get rewarded, drop a comment below. And if you want more stories about corporate warfare, strategic revenge, and how to turn your expertise into leverage, make sure you're subscribed because this is just the beginning. Until next time, remember that your value isn't determined by people too blind to see it. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being too expensive for small minds to afford.